In his case, the advice, don't sweat the small stuff, does not apply. Former Ontario farm kid turned rocket man Chris Hadfield is likely still alive because he sweats the small stuff. He's an airman's airman, a former test and fighter pilot who took thousands of hours of training to learn to be and think like an astronaut. He is Canada's first to walk in space and command the International Space Station. When he was young, he was more interested in fast planes, stars, and guitars than corn and cows. It is my pleasure to welcome Chris Hadfield to Vancouver.
Thanks, Fanny.
I'm assuming that's true.
Yeah, corn and cows. Well, actually, growing up on a farm is a pretty good place to come from if you want to be an astronaut. It teaches you resourcefulness. It teaches how machinery works. It teaches you respect for work itself. It was a good place to come from.
And is a bit of that farm boy still sitting on your shoulder?
Or I'm sitting on the shoulders of that experience, absolutely. Yeah, it's, you know, the practical necessity of what you do in order to be successful on a farm. You're trusted with responsibility at a young age on a farm, and you have to fix things where you don't have the right tools. And a lot of that is pretty good if you're trying to break into a space station with a Swiss Army knife or something that might happen in your life.
No kidding. And a lot of surprises on the farm, as you say.
Yeah, it's not a 9-to-5 job. We grew about 500 acres of corn growing up on a big family, and when it's time to harvest or time to plant, that takes precedence over everything else in life. That understanding of the necessity for useful work in order to accomplish something that's beyond yourself is a pretty good lesson to learn no matter what you want to be when you grow up.
And the Girl Scout motto, which you probably know, is be prepared.
Yeah.
In your case, it's be over-prepared and over-prepared, ultra-prepared.
I'm not sure what over-prepared means. I guess it depends how long you want to wait to see what you were prepared for. But life is normally long, and any skill that you gain, and that's what preparation is just gaining skills. Any skill that you gain will probably at some point in your life surprise you when you realize, oh boy, I'm glad I learned that 18 years ago. I didn't know that was going to be required, but the test turned out to be today. Mm-hmm. So I kind of view every day as a chance to prepare a little better for the things that might happen. And it makes things more interesting.
You also say you were not destined to be an astronaut. You had to become one.
Yeah, absolutely. I decided to be an astronaut when I was a kid, and there was no astronaut program in Canada at that time. And even if there had been a Canadian astronaut, we sure hadn't said what the attributes needed to be. What skill set do you need? What education path should you follow? What job are you going to be doing as an astronaut? If you'd asked me, even in my 30s, do you think maybe you will be NASA's chief in Russia? Mm-hmm. Do you think you might have to learn to speak Russian to fly a Russian spaceship? I would have scoffed at the idea. So it's a constant transformation of not a predestined thing, but constantly turning yourself, evolving yourself into the exigencies of what you really want to be.
Mm-hmm. So you took mechanical engineering and went to university, learned a few things, and when did you first fly?
I joined the Air Cadets when I was a teenager because I'd hoped to be an astronaut and decided to start turning myself into one. And you fly in space, so the verb is to fly. So I thought I'd learn how to fly. So I joined the Air Cadets at 13 or 14 and learned to fly gliders. So the first flight I had was in a glider as a young air cadet, 14 or 15 years old. My very first solo in an airplane was in an unpowered little Schweitzer 233 glider somewhere in southern Ontario. But what a level of responsibility to have at that age, 15 years old, and you are now in 3 dimensions, completely responsible for your own destiny in doing something complex and technical that is evaluated every single time by your ability to safely land that thing back on the Earth. A lot of really good learning from that. And the space shuttle is nothing but a glider when you land it, and so is the Soyuz spaceship. So I was even training back then.
Easy for you to say. Aviate, navigate, communicate.
That's right.
Was that flight school?
That's
that old-time flight school?
That's all-time flight school. There's stuff I learned at 14 that I still use in every airplane and even in the spaceship that I fly. The checklist, the prioritization, the focus on what's the next thing that's going to kill me. And aviate, navigate, communicate. Communication is hardly ever life or death, but aviation and then navigation, boy, you've got to get the order of those things right or you will get killed.
So no matter what, keep flying the plane.
Keep flying the plane, both metaphorically and realistically. Keep flying your plane. Some great advice from one of the best pilots in all history. He said, sometime you're going to have to crash a plane, but keep flying your plane as far into the crash as you possibly can, because it'll improve your odds of surviving.
Mm-hmm. And if we were go to the woo-woo self-help book, it would tell you to visualize, believes in the law of attraction, and you say visualization, great.
Yeah, but visualize failure. To me, there's no margin in visualizing success. If success happens, that's great. If it didn't happen and all you did was visualize success, then you're not prepared. And things are going to go wrong, guaranteed. That's life. Things go wrong, and that's what you need to visualize. And it's going to help you the most if you visualize fear and visualize the things that scare you and visualize failure and disaster, but not just to scare yourself or to give a sense of foreboding. Visualize them so that you can figure out what to do in advance. Have a look at, okay, if this fails, if that thing stops working, if this thing catches on fire, what am I going to do about that? And what can this combination force me into? And then practice that. And then practice the next version and the next version. And when you get 100 of those under your belt or 1,000 of those under your belt, then when the actual event happens, it probably won't be as bad as you visualized, and you have a great sense of comfort and optimism coming into it.
But as a fighter pilot, which you were, and you're flying in enemy territory, it's not always up to you.
No, but you can still visualize and practice and anticipate the things that might happen. And that's what you need to do. That's why we practice dogfighting all the time. When I was holding alert on Canada's east coast to go intercept Soviet bombers that were practicing launch cruise missiles on North America, that's what I did in the 80s. We would practice on a daily basis, practice all the different forms of intercepts, what to do if, as realistic a simulation both on the ground in simulators and air-to-air against each other until no matter what we thought might happen, we had a plan with which to react. And it gives you a calm and a reasoned sense of optimism and confidence.
Any test pilot will tell you that, a fighter pilot will tell you that, an astronaut will tell you that, so you know that.
Yes.
In spades.
You know, absolutely. Not just know it, but you've internalized it. You have turned yourself to some degree into a person that reacts to everything that way.
When you found out you were on the short list, Canadian Space Agency, I know you saw the ad, Astronauts Wanted, and you went through all the process.
Yeah.
Now you're on the short list.
Yeah, the list got shorter and shorter. Initially, the list had a lot of names on it of people applying, and eventually it got weeded down from 5,000 to 500 to 100 to 50. Finally, there were 20 of us, and they brought all of us together into one place in Ottawa in the spring of '92. And we had a pretty grueling week of giving presentations, a board panel interview, coordination tests, medicals like you would not believe. And through that whole process, the final 20 of us, we didn't even know how many they were going to choose. And we didn't know whether we'd ever fly in space. We just knew that we were tantalizingly close to our dreams.
And you were a Canadian, and there were many Americans, and the competition is stiff, and the politics are stiffer.
Yeah, once you get selected and you're trying to fly, of course, as part of an international space program based in Houston, I was a NASA astronaut as well as a Canadian Space Agency astronaut, and so the competition for that short list is extremely multifaceted.
I guess.
And it takes a patience, I mean, not just a patience, but a really optimistic patience and a constant readdressing of why you're actually there in your patience.
And they ask you questions like, Chris, did you ever think about killing your mother? Really?
Yeah, during the psych exams, I swore during those psych exams it wasn't actually the questions they were observing. I thought there was a hidden camera somewhere in the room watching my reaction to these constant barrage of questions would be. But actually, I don't think there have ever been any astronauts not selected because of the psych exams, because they're just looking for big mental aberrations. It's the much more fine physical things, any sort of congenital problem. It's a really, really hard physical to qualify to live on the space station, and that's the majority of people that are not selected. It's because of the medical that's required.
And knowing what to do when you leave the space station and something goes wrong. What can go wrong?
When you're out on a spacewalk, there is nothing between you and the vacuum of space, which is instant and certain death, than the layers of the cloth, of the clothing that you're wearing. It's just an inflated bag of cloth that you're in, but it's really a one-person spaceship. You're completely separate from the mothership. You're just connected by a little clothesline to keep from drifting away. And so it's a fragile little bubble that you're living in, and there's all sorts of things that can go wrong, and that's why we take it so seriously. We do it so seldom and deliberately, and it's why we train for so long.
Of course,
in getting ready.
And if that outfit gets a puncture.
Well, we have a big oxygen tank in the back that can feed a leak for a while, and we actually watch our oxygen rate consumption, because if there was a little leak, how would you even know you have a leak? It would just feed the leak. But as soon as we see our oxygen rate getting used up more quickly, then you got a leak, and then you got so many minutes to hustle in and plug yourself back into the ship.
And if it's not fixed, your lungs blow up, what happens? How long do you have?
The thing that would kill you would be your lungs collapsing, lack of oxygen to the brain. It would kill you pretty quickly. There's lots of other nasty things would happen. Your eyeballs would boil, and your tongue would boil, and you'd get the bends, and lots of pretty disgusting things. But what would kill you, and we thought about it, what would kill me? What's the first thing? Would be a collapse of the lungs and lack of oxygen.
Well, and you can't hightail it back to the spacecraft and have a scotch. If something goes wrong.
You can hurry back as quick as you can. We practice rescuing each other, of course, incapacitated crew rescue. And what you want to do is get back inside the airlock and take the umbilical from the airlock and plug it into the suit as quickly as possible. Try and sustain life if you've had a problem. And then, unfortunately, if you want to have a whiskey at the end of it, you got to wait till after landing, because it's not allowed on the space station.
Not allowed, no. We'll have more with Chris Hadfield after this.